Good morning, dear speakers, attendees, and colleagues. Welcome to the Manila Times Mid-Year Economic Forum 2024, titled Inspiring Optimism, Stimulating Growth. I am Dafort Villaseran, the Manila Times Supplements and Special Projects Editor, and your host for today's event at the midpoint of our economic year. Now, at this critical juncture, it is our hope to drive incremental development from the grassroots to the corporate towers. And towering over some of the speakers later on for our first fireside chat is our resident American and columnist Ben Kritz, who will moderate the question and answer portion of our program. Later, during the two separate fireside chats with groups of our esteemed speakers, we will be having the Manila Times columnist Ben Kritz. We also look forward to hearing a lot of optimistic news from our speakers and maybe even a few pessimistic ones, warnings perhaps to keep us on our toes. Hopefully, all of this information and discussion will be stimulating enough to inspire actionable growth. But before we do spring into action, allow me to introduce our very own man of action, who will give the welcoming remarks. He facilitates bringing not just books, but entire libraries to nooks across the archipelago as the chairman of the National Book Development Board and the Haribon Foundation. He asks the hard questions that need answering by government officials, industry leaders, and even diplomats at the Manila Times Roundtable. He helps the Manila Times keep up with the times with digitalization and data-driven decisions and innovations as its chairman and chief executive officer. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests and colleagues, let's give a warm round of applause for Dante Klink Ang II.
Good morning, everyone. Before we start, let me just greet some of our speakers. Ms. Nina Mangio of the PCCI. Good morning, man. Nice to see you again. You'll be setting the tone for today's forum. Our good friend and supporter, Mr. Lars Wittig of the International Workplace Group. They're not here yet, but later on we'll be hearing from our columnist, CuUnjieng, Mr. Paul Favila of Citi, Philippines, and Ms. Iluminada Sicat of Bangko Sentral. I'd like to greet my colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, those who are watching this forum's live stream. Good morning and welcome to today's forum. I know all of you here are waiting to hear about the current state of the Philippine economy. And for those who are here for the first time, this is precisely why we do these events. We basically opened up our interviews so that a select group of people get to hear from the sources that we talk to without any gatekeepers like us. I know the theme today is optimism and growth, and I'm sure we'd be happy to hear from our guests about how we should be navigating the headwinds that are facing the country today. I think the general mood is that people are optimistic, but of course there are a lot of developments that we need to look at and pay attention to. I know that you're eager to hear from our speakers, so I'll get out of the way. Let me just say that for those who are not here and seeing this video for the first time, the reports will be, of course, published in the print and digital edition of the Manila Times, as well as on our website and social media platforms. And soon you'll also see the full video of this event on the Manila Times streaming channel, which we have launched just recently. Allow me just to thank some of our speakers who made this event possible. Our co-presenter, MegaWorld, our sponsors, Infinivan and SM Investments, our venue sponsor, Lanson Place, our patron sponsors, Smart Trade, Niam Agency, and our media partners, the Manila Times TV, Rising Tigers Magazine, and I think IBC 13 years as well. So I hope you have a productive day, and I look forward to the speakers this afternoon. And welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sir Klink, for your welcoming remarks. Now, as for our first keynote speaker, unfortunately, Rosemarie Edillon, the Undersecretary for Policy and Planning at the National Economic and Development Authority, sends her sincerest apologies, as she has been called to an urgent meeting. So we shall go straight to our second talk. Our technically second speaker is a licensed chemical engineer by profession. She owns several large businesses in the industries of construction, services, and casual dining restaurants. She is Chairman Emeritus of the Employers Confederation of the Philippines, Board of Trustees member of the Philippine Food Exporters Confederation, and Honorary Chairman of the Philippines Korea Economic Council. She is also an Honorary Consul of the Republic of Liberia in West Africa. She gives us a talk today in her capacity as the third female president of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or PCCI. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Enunina Nina Mangio. Nina, the floor is yours. You have about 20 minutes.
Thank you, sir. To all our distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, and participants, a pleasant good morning to all. You know, I prepared a very long speech. Should I make you and you find it boring and nonsense, just give me a sign saying KISS, K-I-S-S. Does anybody here know the meaning of K-I-S-S? Keep it short, stupid. Anyway, you know, my deep appreciation to the Manila Times for inviting me to this year Mid-Year Economic Forum. I am truly delighted to address this esteemed gathering and share insights from the private sector, especially when your team, inspiring optimism, stimulating growth, is precisely what we in the private sector hope to happen. My dear ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to share our perspective on the topic from the private sector lens, especially from the organization I represent, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. My comments will touch on how current and future track of government in running the economy is impacting the businesses community. And I will be sharing with what PCCI is doing to help government foster a vibrant and inclusive economy. Let us look at the state of the Philippine economy from the private sector point of view. First, the global economy is navigating through post-pandemic recovery, geopolitical uncertainties, and technological advancement. Domestically, we are witnessing efforts to stabilize inflation, enhance fiscal policies, and drive sustainable development. Our economy has shown remarkable resilience amidst these global economic uncertainties. Our GDP growth rate is projected to remain robust, estimated at around 6 to 7%. We expect this growth to be driven by strong domestic consumption, increased public and private investment, and vibrant service sector, particularly in IT, BPM, and tourism. We commend the effort of our economic managers for being able to manage inflation within the target range of 2 to 4% through prudent monetary policy and effective interventions. The BSP has adeptly balanced the need to control inflation while supporting economic growth through careful adjustments in interest rates and other monetary tools. The path of strong growth requires a strong public-private partnership. The private sector is the engine of growth. but it needs the support of the government to have enough fuel to propel the economy to a higher level of growth. For business expansion on new investments. You see, we at PCCI have taken the task of intensifying our engagement with the government to provide a business environment that will not only make our companies survive and thrive, but also make our country the destination of choice for foreign investors. We all know that there is steep global competition, not only in trade, but in investment and tourism as well. Let us revisit our business permitting and licensing system and procedures. Among the advocacy of PCCI, we put highest priority to streamlining business permitting and licensing system and procedures at the national and local levels, and digitalizing frontline business services of these agencies. Streamlining and automation impact on all other priority areas like agriculture, industry and services, infrastructure, electricity, even shipping and logistics. We have worked intensively with the Department of Interior and Local Governments, known to us as DILG, and the Anti-Red Tape Authority, a familiar word, ARTA, to bolster effort to simplify processes and reduce bureaucratic tapes. We hope that there is a firm timeline and there is a compliance from the agencies involved in the processes. The expansion of small businesses and the entry of new investment should be a strong incentive, as they will not only create additional jobs, but new sources of revenues as well. Let me look at again our infrastructure buildup. Infrastructure buildup plays a crucial role, both on boosting long-term growth through physical capital and short-term multiplier effect through jobs and spending. We are glad that our President Marcos, has continued the priority projects of the past administration on roads, ports, airports, and bridges. These infrastructure projects, once completed, will make it easier to travel from one island to another and will particularly benefit agriculture, tourism, and even the mineral sectors, the three sectors which can provide the most opportunity for growth and employment in the rural areas. These projects also create significant employment with the high multiplier effect of the construction industry. Completely making connectivity seamless is information and communication technology. I am proud to share that PCCI is working with the ICT as the department makes its maiden offering of ICT projects for public-private partnership. What about our resource-based sectors for sustainable inclusive growth? Consider this. We are the fifth most mineralized country in the world, with untapped reserves estimated to $1 trillion. This is around 3 times our GDP. Yet, mining's share has consistently been less than 1% of our GDP. There is so much potential in this industry. World metal prices are high, and the e-vehicle sector has been rapidly growing. Now, that the coastal area is another gold mine in tourism. Blessed with more than 7,000 islands, we have within our shores some of the world's best beaches and summer destinations. Yet, we lag behind Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and even Singapore in attracting tourists to our shores. Tourism is a major economic pillar and dollar earner. But sadly, incidents like the power outage in our airports continue to shade our potentials. And of course, agricultural. Let's look at the agricultural sector in our country. Any long-term strategy plan for resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy has the agriculture sector as a major component. PCCI has supported the passage of the new Agrarian Reform Emancipation Act, or what we know better as the Farmers' Debt Condonation Act. The law, when fully implemented, is expected to provide much-needed financial relief to the agriculture reform beneficiaries. While it does not specifically address the more important issue of the farm consolidation, we hope that expiration of the comprehensive agrarian reform law should already allow the expansion of land ownership beyond the 5-hectare limit. While remittances and the services industry are helping us withstand the current economic glut, we should be able to develop our resource-based sector to propel the economic transformation. Parallel to this, we have to prepare our most abundant resource, our young and capable workforce, to take advantage of the revolution that is now happening in key industries. Consider our human resource through innovation and education. In recent years, driven mainly by the fourth industrial revolution, innovation became the staple of many a forum on leveraging economic rivers. If we want to look for a model, we need only to look at China and India, whose economies were propelled further by technological innovation and tech talents. India, for one, is now recognized as having unmatched potential to become the world's next Silicon Valley. 93% of our population are capable of being trained for essential skills and competencies. Furthermore, we consistently rank high in the number of knowledge-based jobs and workers with highly qualified managers and IT staff and engineers. We should be able to incentivize them to stay in our country. We aim to help our government leverage in this talent. We are in partnership with DOST to work on projects that will help MSME adapt technologies and automation, to improve their productivity and programs, to upskill and reskill their employees. We have also formed steering committees and technical working group with the Department of Education and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority and the Commission on Higher Education to make sure that they produce the needed skills, competencies, and qualifications needed in the ever-changing world of work. We have a number of things going for us. That becoming a high-growth economy is not far-fetched. But our vision and programs from the national to the local levels have to be in sync. Under the leadership of our President Marcos, we have other opportunities to align our economic programs with our social and development goals to build on the potentials of our natural resources and economic assets. Ladies and gentlemen, we must move on as one with the urgency, focus, integrity, creativity, and courage so that we will not miss the ride on the train. We must come together as one nation and do whatever is necessary to move to a higher plane of growth to realize our shared aspirations of inclusivity and sustainability in growth. I think I have said too much. I don't know whether you've gained anything out of it, but thank you very much. And again, a pleasant good morning to everyone.
Thank you, PCCI President Nina, for the very informative talk that you gave. We wish we could call you back later for our fireside chat, but we do understand that you have a pressing engagement. And we are thankful that you will be, that you're endorsing to us Mr. Jude Aguilar, Vice President for International Trade Affairs, to represent you later. So for now, we shall have our next scheduled talk, technically our third speaker. Now, our next speaker moved to the Philippines in 1992 to establish distribution systems for Philip Morris. He has been a marketing director for Dole Packaged Goods, Hawaiian Tropic, and Coca-Cola. He has also been chairman and president of the European Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. Now he is concurrently the International Workplace Group, or IWG, country manager for the Philippines and the senior vice president for Asia Pacific North. Ladies and gents, please welcome Lars Wittig.
Today we are talking about optimism. When I lived in Los Angeles, they called me Lala Lars, and that has sort of stuck till recent times. Now I'm becoming a grandfather, so now it's Lolo Lars. But I can guarantee you, even without the excuse to stand here and talk about optimism, I am extremely optimistic about the outlook of this country. I base it on the fact that, yes, I've been doing business in this country since 1992, so many decades, actually. Back in 1992, when I moved here, the most recent census, there was 65 million people living in the Philippines. So I've been doing business here since before the average Filipino was even born. I'm also regional today, so therefore I have very good perspective on what is the issues, opportunities, but also bottlenecks, things holding businesses back in the other ASEAN countries. And it's quite interesting to look at problems that we don't have in this country, but actually we used to have them. And again, I do recall it from back in the, not least the 1990s. So with that background, also I should mention I am a businessman. I'm just a businessman, as I always say when I'm challenged too much on politics. And at least officially, I'm not an economist either, but primarily a businessman. But because I used to be the president and chairman of the European Chamber of Commerce, the largest foreign chamber in this country, until June last year, I've really advocated at the highest levels for many of the reforms under the previous and the current government that is really enable so many investments, so much progress, and again, fueling my personal optimism. Philippines is today the top grower in ASEAN. And that is really unique. We have historically been struggling. We have historically had good years, but not consistently for several years in a row, and definitely not several administrations in a row. But now we are seeing this consistent growth improvements, which are basically putting us in the lead. And as we all know, the lead dog always have the most fun and the best view anyway. We should really, every single Filipino should enjoy this success. We know that success just fuels further success. And this is something to be proud of. The growth rates are not necessarily always as high as predicted, but that's because of global headwinds. So as long as we are just kicking ass, excuse my French, on especially Vietnam, Indonesia, the countries that we generally should compare ourselves with, VIP, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, when we are number one in that company, then we know that we are doing something right. The government, first of all, fiscal spending is extremely responsible. That's the positive way of putting it, because I'm from Europe, and in order to be a good boy in class in the European Union, you cannot have a national deficit over 60% of your GDP. So that means your accumulated deficit cannot be over 60% of your GDP. Very few countries actually manage that in Europe. The biggest economies like France are now at risk of being penalized because they can't get it below 60%. If you go to Japan, I'm not up to date, but it's minimum 200%. In the Philippines, it is, because of COVID, we just climbed above the 60, and now we are pretty much back at 60 or below. There is no need for us to be below. There is no need for the Philippines to be declining the fiscal deficit. We should be investing more. The government should be spending more, actually. The government, I would bluntly say, are underspending. So this is positive, but nobody ever asked to be best in class on minimizing government deficit relative to the GDP. Nobody asked for that. We don't need it. We need the investments. Currently, the investments are being pursued primarily, as we just heard, by the way, through the PPPs. That's great, but it is a long process. So the numbers that are being pledged, the figures are tremendous, as we heard. But the government should also pocket out investments directly themselves faster, rather than just following that process of PPPs. And then when it comes to human capital, let me start by saying, we just talked about government deficit, and government deficit, that's like capital as in real money, pesos, dollars, right? We should also talk about human capital, another kind of capital. And so, talking about inspiring optimism, I don't know, you should all have the newspaper in front of you that Sarah Duterte has resigned as Secretary of Education. As you may recall from the election, there were two areas that everybody, regardless the color of their shirts, they really agreed we need new reforms on education. And we haven't seen that. And trust me, there are bottlenecks in Vietnam. The cost of manufacturing labor in Vietnam is increasing dramatically. It has gone from way below Philippine levels to now being exactly at par and increasing. They are short of headcount. So what are they doing in order to lure in investors anyway? Well, I go there frequently, and they told me that they have the most improved educational system. So therefore, IT companies, you should always choose Vietnam. It's a good argument. It really, really annoys me, because I can argue, I think, better with reference to their bottlenecks, but I can't take away the fact that they have the most improved educational system. And we know in the Philippines that we have the educational system, the quality is far too low and it's not improving. So actually, if you take a closer look at how the human capital index is comprised, we're doing extremely well in some regards. For example, the ability to use 1/2 of the population so much better as part of the workforce. That's the women. I mean, many of the other countries that I go to, Indonesia and Malaysia in particular, the women are not really accepted into the workforce as the deciding profile sitting at the managerial tables. We are very good here at closing the gender gap, #1 in Asia Pacific, actually, better than even Australia and New Zealand. And by the way, better than Denmark, where I'm from. Maybe it's the Danish women that are not as tough as the Filipino women. I don't know. But what it comes down to is, what also pulls it down, by the way, besides education, one other factor, that's nutrition. The likelihood of having a healthy, productive life until you are 60 or 65 from your 17 is extremely low in the Philippines. But where I, for the first time, see consistent improvement at a rate that is unprecedented, that is basically in terms of employment. Employment is increasing dramatically, and that is really good jobs that are being created. So here are some very major improvements. Let me just get to one more that is normally not highlighted. I don't know why, but fertility rate in the Philippines has dropped to 2.75. What does that mean? In regards to the size of the population, we are still growing the population, but at a lower rate. Vietnam, I keep saying Vietnam and bottlenecks. In Vietnam, the fertility rate has dropped to 1.99. That means they're not getting enough babies to sustain the size of their population. So while we here in the Philippines every year have almost 2 million young people entering the workforce, more than half of them with some kind of college degree, and we are still looking to continue with large enough generations entering the workforce. Vietnam have the exact opposite. Very important to things we don't talk about because it doesn't face us. If it is not a problem, we forget about it, even if it used to be a problem. But trust me, when I go to other markets and I hear that, oh, these are real concerns, then it's like, great. Here's a note for my little black book when I have to convince big investors why they have to go to the Philippines. And then we have inclusive growth. This is fantastic news. Another thing that is not getting even the best media, like Manila Times, are not writing enough about this. We are seeing a fantastic decline in poverty. This is poverty as defined by a certain number of dollars per day. It's not the perception of people, are you worried about your next meal or being able to feed yourself or your family next week? That's not what I'm talking about. Statistically, do they really have a certain minimum amount of money per day for food, etc.? And that poverty is declining so dramatically, it is expected to hit 10.7% already next year. And we can see that it was very close to 20% with COVID. I think it was lower than 20% pre-COVID. And then, of course, it went up again. But has never, for many, many, many years, been even close to the 10.7%. Remember, when I came to the Philippines in '92, population was 65 million. Now it is 115 million. It has always been that race, the growth of the economy relative to the growth of the population. And unfortunately, the population growth over time was always outspeeding the economic growth. Now it is the other way around. In the Philippines, 2.75 babies per female is enough to increase the population, but it is overall a decrease, which is, by the way, a global trend. But if you were in Vietnam or Indonesia and you have a GDP per capita the same as the Philippines, you cannot afford to suddenly have an aging society, and that's what they are facing right now. Until then, it was actually Thailand, which has GDP per capita 3-4 times higher, that was the poorest country in the world with an aging society. We have an average age here of barely 25. In Vietnam, it is in the early 30s. In Thailand, it's almost 40. This is really working for us, and it will continue to work for us in many years to come, and it will become an increasing bigger problem in the other markets. Let me just see if I can figure out to go back. There was one very important thing here that I forgot. That is that the middle class, when I came here in 92, I would say there was no middle class. There was poor and there was rich, period. I might have been, when I lived in Bel Air in 1992, there were many, if Europeans came to visit, they would assume this was a nice middle class area because the houses were not too big, and the houses were definitely not very big. The reality was, it was of course very wealthy people, and if you're not living in Bel Air, then it was the exact opposite. So a middle class increasing from 40 to 80 million in barely 10 years, that is significant. That means buying power that makes the market extremely exciting. I used to work for the Coca-Cola company here. This is one of their top 10 largest markets in the world. Nestle was on the board of directors when I was chairman for the European Chamber. This is one of their top 10 markets in the world. The company I work for, IWG, Regis, Spaces, HQ, this is out of 120 countries. This is one of the top 10 markets in the world. I mean, Philippines is way underrated. We need to amplify these successes, which of course I do when I have to explain to potential investors who are, say, divesting from China, and then they say, could you have a dinner with our CEO visiting from Europe? He needs to decide whether he should divest from China into India or Southeast Asia, and if Southeast Asia, why not the Philippines? And of course, I'm very happy that they asked me that question. There have been extremely many reforms, and besides my day job with the European Chamber, I have on several occasions been representing all foreign chambers in the Philippines. So the Canadians, the Japanese, the Americans, the Koreans, Australia, New Zealand, and of course all of Europe. So this is basically all major foreign players that I've been representing and been made available to answer questions in Senate hearings in front of the Committee for Amending the Constitution, and not least with the Public Service Act hearings, where they only wanted one to represent all foreign chambers, and that became me. And that reform there alone was an absolute game changer. I was just sharing that I had ordered Starlink at home. If you recall, Starlink is now available in the Philippines, but nowhere else in Southeast Asia. How come? Public Service Act. 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks after the President Duterte, he signed the Public Service Act. Symbolically, he handed it to me. Less than 2 weeks later, Elon Musk announced, I think in Barcelona, that Philippines was now getting Starlink as the first country in Southeast Asia. These things really make a difference. And it's fantastic because they make a difference out in the poorer areas, and we're talking about not just growth, but inclusive growth. The further away you get from Metro Manila, the worse it gets with the internet connections. Now they have easy access to internet. The further away you get from Metro Manila, by the way, the poorer people become, and the more expensive the same consumer products become because of the cost of distribution. Public Service Act was also about opening up for up to 100% foreign ownership on domestic shipping. I was fought heavily in Senate at that hearing on that subject, but luckily common sense prevailed, and now domestic shipping is also up to 100% ownership. ARTA is another fantastic initiative here, by the way. Nothing to do with the reforms, it's just the anti-red tape drafted by one of the driving profiles was Congressman Paul Daza. It really works. We have now green lanes for investors. It's fantastic. President signed amendments to the Renewable Energy Act. There's one company alone that it was less than 3 months after he signed that a Danish company, coincidentally, I'm from Denmark, they pledged that they are investing $7 billion in offshore wind energy. 7 billion, and they are actually our customers now at Spaces, so I know they are here, and they are hiring like you wouldn't believe it. So again, another area where we see much needed investments because we want the energy, we want green energy, but it is also because of the reforms of the governments that these things are happening. Then, this is interesting. We're now on a solid track officially to get a EU-Philippine free trade agreement. That was very, very difficult under the former government because of human rights issues. There was freedom of speech, the media, but also, of course, the killings in regards to the drug war. So that sort of like overshadowed the common sense. Of course there should be a free trade. Come on, the free trade agreement with Vietnam, why not with us? If it is human rights, Vietnam, I could argue in 2 minutes why it should be us rather than Vietnam. Vietnam has no democracy, no freedom of press. They have the death penalty, they absolutely use it. Zero democracy is communism, and still they think they should have a free trade based on Lars, we are following value-based foreign policies. BS. I mean, that was because there was money in it, right? But now suddenly geopolitical issues are really helping us, and this really plays into our hands. Right now, Vietnam is making a huge mistake that will really discourage Europe. Who is visiting Vietnam now? Just left North Korea? Putin. This is all about Ukraine, guys. Why is Ursula von der Leyen standing next to me in this picture? Because Ukraine made Europe realize that you should not get too involved in a country like Russia if suddenly you have a conflict like what Russia has created with Ukraine. And out here, China, Europe is horrified about China's how the way that they are engaging, that's a nice word, relative to Taiwan and Philippines and many other markets, countries out here, but especially those two nations I would call even Taiwan. This really matters. This is why she is out here. She really wants to go in and help. Mining was mentioned earlier. Most of raw zinc to China is coming from the Philippines, and now that Philippines are probably going to do the same as Indonesia and say we're not going to just export the raw materials, we're going to do the value-add processing here. China like, oh, but then just like Indonesia, we would like to own that. We'll make those investments for you. No way. That is not happening now because Europe are going to make a program which they already have used in other markets where we can prevent that is China that goes in and take over ownership of that kind of vital resources, which we already in our constitution have tried to secure that exactly foreign companies are not going to take away and deplete from this country. So value add here with the help of EU, she was very, very explicit, Ursula, about the comparison between Russia, Ukraine, and then China, Taiwan. And now that is why we are getting positive attention, and Vietnam are just making a huge mistake by saying, welcome, Mr. Putin. And then my day job, equally passionate and positive about it, We are getting over 1,000 incoming inquiries for workspace here in the Philippines every single month. When I look at these inquiries, it's like looking in a crystal ball. I can literally see what will happen 3, 6, 9 months from now before even Manila Times knows about it. Most new embassies, they start with that return to the Philippines over the last 10, 15 years, they started with us. I mean, this is a SM development who have come in and done business with SM, IKEA, H&M, etc. They all started with us. So I literally, when FEMSA came in, the big investor in Coca-Cola, although they left again after the, years later, I mean, but deals like that are brokered in our centers. So I literally see things that nobody else sees, and statistically, I have a meaningful number and mass to look at because, again, it's over 1,000 incoming inquiries every single month. So yes, the nation is growing. I believe that flexible workspace as a service, we also like an incubator to the nation. So we help the country grow, but the growth of the country certainly also helps us expand. It's now about 10 years ago that we pioneered our business concept of serviced office space into, say, Davao City, together with Damosaland, the Lactameo family. If you talk to the CEO of Damosaland today, he says that the first 3 years, 85% of all customers were doing business for the first time in Mindanao. So we actually enable investors to come in sooner rather than later because there was a very easy touchdown point with no long-term liabilities and no capital investments. And that's basically what we are seeing throughout the nation. I couldn't help putting in Kota Kinabalu, by the way, but officially, at least, it's not part of the Philippines. But you can see we do have a network where we really want to be everywhere. We have 4,000 locations globally. We just opened our second center in Pampanga. We are opening later this year in Baguio. We are in Iloilo, in Cebu, Cagayan de Oro, where we're opening our second center, Davao the third center, Cebu is the third center. We are expanding like crazy. We came here in 1998 with the first center that we opened in the Philippines. Last year, we barely had 20 locations. At the end of this year, we'll be having 40. So on that note, yes, we are definitely positive, and I believe so should you be. A few sample pictures from all my advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, IWG Country Manager Lars, for your optimism. We invite you to please remain on stage. Mr. Lars, if we can ask you to join our Manila Times columnist Ben Kritz for the fireside chat. And then to represent PCCI President Nina Mangio, we welcome again Mr. Jude Aguilar, Vice President for International Trade Affairs, to represent.
Thank you for, thank your principal for her talk, and thank you for joining us. And Lars, of course, it's always interesting to hear from you. You have some insights that I think are kind of unique. I have a list of notes that I jotted down, and I'm not quite sure where to start. But let me start with you, Jude. One buzz phrase that came up in the talk, and we hear it quite often, is making the Philippines an investment destination of choice. So, from your perspective at PCCI, what needs to happen to make it a destination of choice? Is it already, or is there something else that's still lacking?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I'll try my best to answer that. Lately, we looked at the scenario of a lot of companies moving from China and relocating their businesses. We saw that we weren't even in their their perspective or their view. Philippines was not there. It was Indonesia, it was Vietnam, it was Thailand. So we have been promoting rather extensively. Last year, we just signed, for the first time, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce signed with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I was so surprised that this never happened. This is the first time that we were able to sign with the Chamber of Commerce. So now we are engaging with them for these American companies, number one, that hope that they push and help these companies move towards the Philippines. What do we have? We have, of course, a very sweet demographic spot. We have an age range of, I think, 25 to 26 years old, predominantly English speaking, very learned, and may very well be easily upskilled and trained. So we have that. We also advocate, we do a lot of advocacies to, as Lars said, that we've been promoting and working with government for the likes of ARTA, to continue working with ARTA, the anti-red tape, and ease of doing business. The PCI does this all to level the playing field and give businesses a hand up, as to put it shortly, to put it bluntly. So we have been talking to our counterpart chambers. Right now, we have 53 business councils of different countries actively looking for businesses to come to the Philippines or new markets for our Philippine products to go abroad. So we are very active, and I think last year we started that. We signed up with Japan again for the first time. I don't know why, but this happened during the Philippine Business Conference last year. So we've been doing a lot of activities. So I think we are slowly getting there. That climb and getting recognized and getting the attention of the other businesses and foreign direct investments to look at the Philippines, to take a second look, I think that is happening now.
Okay, well, you touched on something there that I was expecting to hear at some point during this forum. The demographic sweet spot, if you like, the young population here relative to other countries. But Lars also mentioned the education reform. So you have and this is not news to anybody. I mean, this has been for several years. Anybody that takes more than a cursory look at the Philippines knows about the young population. That is something that investors that are thinking long term are going to look at in terms of being able to have a workforce. And we always hear the same thing. Well, we have a young population. They can be trained, they can be reskilled, upskilled, whatever. Well, okay, but is that happening? Is our education system overall cut out for that, because an investor that's looking to come here to the Philippines, they want to see that stuff going on now. Yeah. It's going on now in India. It's going on now in India especially. Yeah. So what's being done about that? Okay,
I will only speak on the perspective of PCI, not what's happening in our government.
Well, yeah, of course,
okay.
From your point of view, of
yes.
course.
Yes, we do have. I mean, we have that sweet spot. But are we educating them? Good question. Just last year, and actually during when we started engaging with the various international chambers, our counterpart chambers. We've been pushing for these enterprise-based education. Meaning, let the enterprises, I mean, you can have your reading, writing, arithmetic, and all that stuff, no? But what we are looking for is also what skills are you actually looking for? Tell us, engage with us, bring your people, and we will mentor them. And that way, we're working with DOST, we're working with TESDA, to have that, because before it was just, okay, we'll offer all these types of skills development, but without being focused. Now there is a move to focus the requirements of these enterprises and bring it down to the people, the demographic, the workforce. So that's what we've been doing. And we've had the cooperation of Japan. We are now working with US, the chamber. And I think recently we were discussing with another group, another chamber too. I'm not sure if it's, I think it's Taiwan, to bring in those new skills. And because even if let's say all these companies come in and then they have their machines and their equipment that nobody knows how to run, then useless.
Exactly.
So that's what we are actually promoting. And with that also, I think we just have the, if I'm not mistaken, the 88 carnet. Yes, PCI now is, I think it will happen in July, this July. We will be promoting the 88 carnet when companies can bring in their equipment, their specialized equipment, without having to pay their taxes, for training, for mentoring, for educating, and for even for exhibiting.
Okay.
If I may add a comment to this, from the business point of view, we see more and more in private investors putting money into building schools and educational institutions. Today it is actually perceived as a better investment than building a hospital, which is interesting because that could actually alleviate a bit of the pressure on the government and the responsibilities of the government, that I think more and more of this will be carried by the private sector, simply because it's a good business. Another thing is, when we look at the investments, the foreign investments, where things are really growing right now, this creates fantastic opportunities for educating people and specializing them in future sectors that we know are up and coming all over the world, but where there's still not to this day a formalized educational program for the entire industry. A good example, again, going back to since I'm from Denmark, the offshore wind farms. They're investing $7 billion building offshore wind farms. Can you imagine if we structure the education of the workers, Filipino workers, to be able to build these offshore wind farms, and subsequently other classes that are able to operate and maintain these offshore wind farms? We know Philippines will be basically pioneering, along with Taiwan, in this part of the world, offshore wind energy. There's not anywhere in the world that the industry has been able to organize a formal education for that sector. If we get that right in the Philippines, then in the future, just like sailors today, Filipino sailors are a massive resource and earner of foreign currency into the Philippines, that could be our next big opportunity to have Filipino workers in the sustainable energy sector.
Okay. I wanted to, well, that sounds like a good idea. Good luck with that, because you're going to have to deal with Chad. And I think that could be a burr under everybody's saddle, but that's a political thing, and so maybe, that's not really your area. I wanted to, I noticed your one graphic, you're talking about some of the, economic advantages the country has, and part of that is the rather substantial amount of remittances. But that also represents, I think, roughly 20% or 25% of the potential workforce that is going out, and just it's the same thing as like the mineral resources that just get dug up and sent off as raw ore. There's a lot of value added there that's not, that's not being collected. So, do you see solutions like what you guys have talked about? Could that help to reduce the number of overseas workers, or at least reduce it down to the ones that are like the mariners, that the skilled people?
Of course, I can follow the argument that, but whenever we educate good people, then they move abroad. I went to Zamboanga in December, and they said we have great educational systems, but every time they graduate, then they go to better paid jobs in Davao City. And then the CEO of the Moslane, he said, that's funny because we used to say the same. When we have educate people in Davao, then they go to Cebu and take all, better paid jobs there. And as a nation, we educate people and then they go abroad to take better paid jobs there also. Okay, that was the glass half full. So today is about being optimistic. And here we have an absolute competitive advantage, because once the fertility rate decreases even further, once we start hitting bottlenecks in this country with certain types of educated employees, etc., we are the only nation in this part of the world that have a secret card to be played. Once salaries become competitive, we have 10 million Filipino workers who generally didn't go abroad when they were young because they wanted to do an international career. No, it's just like example, the nurses today who go to, say, the US to be able to send money home and sustain their families basically back in the Philippines. It's not because they grew up with this work dream of international career. When our salaries gradually become increasingly competitive, the middle class will be getting fewer and fewer children. We are facing a bottleneck. Well, suddenly it will be worthwhile for the OFWs to come back. And not only will they come back, they will hit the runway running, because they are already living up to international standards. So it's a huge advantage on site.
That's an interesting point. I don't know that anybody's thought of something like that. Do you have a
Actually,
you want to add?
I agree with Lars. I see it. I'm more optimistic about it. You have. I don't know how many Filipinos we have abroad, no, or OFWs. Number one, they help the economy when things go bad. That is our third or fourth leg that we stand on, because there is revenue coming in from abroad, especially when we're in a crisis situation. So that's good. Number two, I think they are exposed. They get educated. When they come back here, they bring whatever new technologies, new learnings, new standards. Number three, you're right. When businesses now become more competitive and the wages go higher, and they see that there's no difference, the difference between what they're making and what they will make in the Philippines is very small, I believe they will come back. So I see it as, it is what it is now, but that will slowly change as the business and the economic environment improves.
Okay. All right. Well, it'd be something to watch. Now I want to ask, what's on PCCI's list? What's the number one concern right now? If you had to pick one issue that needs to be dealt with, whether it's through government action or something the government and the business sector should do together, or something that the business sector isn't doing that they should be doing? What's the first big step?
Well, that would be difficult to isolate which, because there's so many moving parts. We have just been heavily advocating for the wage increase, that it be brought back to the tripartite rather than becoming a legislative, legislative action. That it must be researched, it should not be used as a tool to generate votes. Because eventually, when you keep on increasing the wages, then it is inflationary. And it's at the end of the day, it will be bad for business. Because you see, still the informal sector is still the greater majority compared to the formal business. Other things that we would like to concentrate on, of course, the issue with agriculture. We're worried about food security. Everything we do now is to import. No? We have land, we have salt, we have a large coastline, and yet our salt industry is not progressing. Well, good to know that now we have the Salt Act. So there's agriculture. There's also, of course, education. You need to educate the people. But even before that, we also understand that you have to feed people. You need nourishment. In fact, we just had a project recently saying that it is a must that Filipino families take care of the first 1,000 days. If the children are not fed properly, then there begins malnourishment. And of course, education, brain improvement, etc., etc. So difficult to say exactly which sector. But another one that we are also very gung-ho about is the ease of doing business, anti-red tape. Businesses have to be able to conduct their businesses in a fair manner, easily, and competitively. If, let's say, you have, which stems again down to local corruption, etc., and so on and so forth. So those are, I think right now that the forces or the factors that we are looking at that we'd like to focus on.
Okay.
If I may add to that, I totally agree. You should not just suddenly increase the minimum salary with, what was it, 100 pesos per day. Finally, the cost of a worker in manufacturing sector in Vietnam hit $205 per month, pretty much at level with the Philippines. If we suddenly add 100 pesos per day, without adding productivity, we just hit ourselves. It's not good for anybody, because that will actually be counterproductive. The cost of labor is, of course, also very much, you have to look at productivity. And if the productivity increases, then it's a different story. And that is where we basically end up with the same answer, the same solution: fix the educational system, and you will bring up productivity as well.
Well, that's exactly the point, I think, because you compare even though poverty is dropping in this country, you compare the GDP per capita of excuse me, the Philippines and Vietnam. Philippines is about a little over 12,000 PPP. Vietnam's 15.5. So yeah, they get paid more because they're worth more. And I think that's the thing that needs to change. I'm dying to ask you one question, and I don't know if you're going to answer this or not, but I know in your day job you do have a good a good view of what's coming up. Is there anything from your crystal ball that you would be willing to share with us? Apart from the developments with the offshore wind, we've talked about that before. What else are, what other, if not specific companies, what other areas do you see, some near-term interest in?
Well, I would say the overall trend is that we see still approximately half of our customers are international companies, many of them coming here the first time. But we also see more and more local companies becoming our customers, and in the provinces, local companies becoming our customers. The entrepreneurs in the provinces, they very quickly see the light, the idea in taking an office or some space or membership with us, because it also enables them to do business in other cities where we also represent it. We give them a platform, a launch platform where they are to do business nationally, later regionally, and even globally. In our company, even though we are the biggest in the country doing what we are doing, we are not relying on BPOs, but it is a big part of our customers, but it's not top 10. And we are not relying on POGOs. The mix of industries, it's everything, from fast-moving consumer goods to services and other skills that are coming into the country because of other massive investments taking place. So it pretty much mirrors the sectors that we already know are expanding and that are to a high degree relying on expertise also from abroad.
Okay.
If I may just add, I think also the PCI is very optimistic with the electronic manufacturing. With the CHIPS Act, we feel that there's this vibe that things are looking towards the Philippines, rather than to go to value add, to provide value added products or parts for chip making industry. The other one is agriculture. Everyone is looking at agriculture. Everyone's saying, okay, because there is really, the president is focused on agriculture, and we feel that there will be a lot of new technologies coming in, just for increasing production, increasing with lower areas. We've been engaging closely with Israel. We've been engaging closely with India and Indonesia. So I think even the agricultural sector is a place to watch.
Okay, well, on that note, where does PCCI stand on the big one lately, the reduction in the rice tariff and the adjustment on, or actually lack of adjustment on some other agricultural commodities? Is that not a big issue, or is that a problem for building up the sector here?
Okay, the reduction in rice tariff for us, we think it is today a means to ensure that you will have consistent supply. I think it is temporary. Then after that, we will see. Let's see from there. Because right now we are addressing the problem that there's a lack of, and we may need that. The El Nino is coming in. We will have several crises. I think they foresee several crises coming in. So I think that is just a temporary solution or a band-aid to address our food security issues.
Well, it's a band-aid that they intend to last for 4 years. Does it need to be that long?
Well, we'll see. Again, PCI, what we will do is we look at the scope, we look at the landscape, and then we will have to advocate, we will have to work with government, and we will have to discuss and see if, let's say, there are better ways to solve that issue.
Okay. All right. First of all, does anybody in the audience have any questions or comments they want to make? We got a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I'll let each of you, give us a final word before lunchtime.
All right. On a trip last year to Vietnam, I keep saying Vietnam, but anyway, it's not an advertisement for Vietnam, as you can hear. I attended an event like this, and they just had a terrible quarter where Philippines had outperformed everybody else, and they came in extremely low in GDP growth. They were locking up the entire government during COVID. They went to prison. The biggest female investor in real estate was sentenced to death. They're basically trying to eliminate corruption, which is impossible. Vietnam is more corrupt than the Philippines statistically, literally. So everything had basically hit a wall. And what this person said to me was, your president, he travels a lot. He doesn't have his family name working for him, but boy, he's doing all the right stuff. I wish ours would do the same. And after the last numbers, it seems, and here it comes, the statement, you guys, meaning Philippines, you are facing a new golden era. We, meaning Vietnam, we just ended ours.
Okay, that's food for
well
thought.
Well said, Lars. Well, for PCI, I'd like to, if I may, invite the audience. We will be having our Philippine Business Conference and Expo, 50th Philippine Business Conference and Expo on October 22 and 23. This is the largest single Philippine expo in the country. We have 5 regions, over 120 local chambers, foreign delegates, etc., etc. It's a 2-day event. It will be held at the Marriott. So we hope and we invite, and we hope that you can be there.
Okay. Well, thank you both, and we'll look forward to having an updated conversation probably in about another 6 months' time.
Thank you.
So that's about the time we have for our fireside chat. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Now, our speaker for this afternoon has been involved in advising notable companies in leading various financial transactions in the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and the broader Asia-Pacific region. He has served as an independent director of local and international listed companies such as First Philippine Holdings, PBCom, and Century Pacific. He was honored with Euromoney's Top 50 Under 40 in banking and finance in January 1998 and was recognized as one of Global Finance's 100 emerging market superstars in June 1994. Ladies and gents, it is my pleasure to present to you global investment banker and the Manila Times columnist Stephen CuUnjieng. Stephen, you have about 20 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I said, okay. Thank you very much. And again, I apologize because Bianca asked me to speak today, and I said I didn't have time to prepare notes or write a presentation. I said, go ahead and do it anyway. So in keeping with today's theme, what are some of one of the things I like to stress is both the challenges and the opportunities we face and we must overcome to have sustained growth and optimism are structural. There are things which predate any administration, and administrations help or hurt them, but the problems predate them and will post-date them. And I think until we meaningfully address these structural issues, there will be a cap and a ceiling on downside and upside. Okay, what are some of the structural issues which I think the Philippines has to face? One is basically everything is political. All right? People, I remember Klink and I had the discussion. There's a coup attempt here, and investors and tourists will not come for 10 years. There's a successful coup in Thailand, and they're all back in Phuket and Bangkok after the airport opens, if the airport even closes. All right? Now, and people said, why does that happen? And I said, one of the reasons I surmise is we have a very effective, they have a much more effective and less and not politicized civil service that keeps the day-to-day running of government going regardless of who is there. And people say, oh, but is it because we're a democracy? I said, you look, in South Korea and Taiwan, you have kickboxing matches in their parliament, but they're growing a lot better than us. So why can Thailand have successful coups, Taiwan and South Korea have martial arts exhibits inside the parliament, participated by most of the parliamentary members, throwing chairs as well and having, why? Because two things. They have a civil service that is less politicized, more career-driven, more effective. Okay, what is the most effective government agency? And I say this as an independent bank director, the BSP. They're proactive, they're professional, and they're depoliticized. If the entire government bureaucracy could be like the BSP, we would be a much better country. Look at how sound our banking system is. That's not there by accident. That's there because it was curated and watched. So, same thing with bureaucracy as a whole. Second, certain issues are considered beyond politics. They're consensus. Let me give you a very basic example. Infrastructure. I'll give you two. Look at how contentious it is to have roads and highways and toll roads bid and everything. First, I think the approach we take is wrong. Why is there a premium paid? Don't we understand the difference between privatization and PPP? In privatization, you are selling an asset, so you want the best price because you're done with it after. In PPP, you're asking the private sector to build an asset which normally would possibly be done by the government. So you want it to be the cheapest and you want the users to pay the least so that the country becomes efficient. But yet we ask for this premium, which has nothing to do with the asset. But guess what? We're basically funding this year's budget by amortizing it over the life of the concession, which the users will pay for, which makes us less competitive. So, first, but look at how contentious is it politically. Now, you compare that to what I consider the most successful, longest-running infrastructure project in the world, the United States Interstate Highway System. In the 1930s, when he was a major, Eisenhower was asked to transport a platoon of heavy, armor from the East Coast to the West because they were told, let's see if there is a war where we had to move troops and armaments and material from one coast to the other, how long it would take. It took him 3 weeks. He was appalled. So when he became president, after he was sworn in 1953, he set up the Interstate Highway System. And here we are, 71 years later. It's still going. It never ends. Regardless of which administration, it is done. It is not political. Now, let me give you another example. Airports. When I first flew to Changi in the late 1980s, there were 2 runways. Now they're building their 5th. Cheplak Kok also started with 2 runways in 1997. Without both airports, without any backlog, without having airplanes circle for 1 hour and wait when you're in the tarmac to take off, they're also building their 5th runway. It's not even an issue. It's just planning. It's just execution. Now, never mind a runway. Let's look at Terminal 3. It was awarded during the Ramos administration, was built partly during the Estrada administration, was litigated and everything during the Arroyo administration. A terminal, is that contentious and political? So certain issues I would hope our executive and legislative branch can start treating as beyond politics. Go and have your kickboxing fights and everything over the things you fight about, but can certain things just be a consensus? So for me, if we can depoliticize things which aren't inherently political anyway in other countries, then that would be great. Now, second, besides infrastructure, we have a demographic nightmare. I don't believe in the demographic dividend. When they talk about the demographic dividend, they talk about places like Korea, Japan, Scandinavia, where the population is getting older and in some cases even shrinking, and the retirement liabilities are getting very onerous because the number of workers supporting retirees is going down. So we're saying, oh, the Philippines is in a wonderful demographic dividend spot because we have so many people under 30 who are going to have 30 more years of prime working age. I'm sorry, I just don't agree. Because that is true in countries with full employment and first world status. When you're telling 20% of the people who come into the workforce every year, go abroad or you're going to starve, that is not a demographic dividend. In a previous graph that I showed in another Manila Times seminar, I said, who has had the most draconian population policy in the world over the last 50 years? China. You are mandated to have one child only, with very small exceptions. So from I'm 65 years old. There are 115 million Filipinos. You guess how many Filipinos there were when I was born? Okay, I bet you none of you will guess 19. Our population has grown over 600% in my lifetime. During that same period, China grew 250%. So in other words, if China grew at the same rate the Philippines grew, there would be 3.5 billion Chinese, not 1.4. But what have we shown? From 1960 to 2022, the Philippine growth per capita was 12 times. Don't think that's good. The US, which was already the richest country at that time, grew 21 times. India grew 28 times, and that was not considered great. Who was the winner? China, 139 times because of Deng Xiaoping's reforms. Thailand, 71 times. All right? So if the demographic dividend was needed, why did the country with the highest demographic dividend grow 12 times and the country with the worst population policy grow 139 times? No. Demographic dividend is relevant when you have full employment. And what do we need to begin to have full employment? Manufacturing. Why? Every manufacturing job, on average, creates about 5 jobs. How many new jobs does an OFW create? 0. Let's assume you're an assembly line worker in Toyota. There'd be a job created for the parts manufacturer who supplies you. There's your job. There's probably the sales job. There's probably the logistics jobs from the person bringing. So it averages about 5 jobs. And we're a manufacturing desert. What is my proof that we are a manufacturing desert? We're 115 million people. All right? Our peak power consumption is between 15 and 16,000 megawatts. How do you run a hotel like this? Basically, lights and air conditioning, okay? That's what the power you need. You turn iron ore into billets. You're making a raw product a finished product. Then you're making a finished product a highly developed product. That uses a lot of power. An average steel mill uses 40 to 50% of its cost in power. Now, what is the proof that we are a manufacturing desert? Remember, 15,000 megawatts for 115 million people. Vietnam, with 96 million people, 60,000 megawatts. Not double, times 4. Thailand, with 70 million people, so less than 2/3, is more than double. Malaysia, with 1/3 our people, is 19,000 megawatts. That's what's happening when you have manufacturing. Apart from cement and food, we don't have manufacturing. You know, I'm an advisor to PAG and to Open Space. Open Space was just awarded the best venture capital firm in Asia, and PAG is the largest Asia-only PE firm in the world. I mean, others are bigger, but they're global. Asia only is PAG, all right? And they say, oh, we're very bullish on the Philippines. They are. Otherwise, when I retired in 2022, they wouldn't have come within 1 month saying, you're no longer at Evercore. Can you please join us as senior advisors? Do nothing and get paid and just give you introductions and guide you? Sure. A wonderful post-retirement job. Then after they looked at it, they said, we want to buy, we like the prospects. Why is there nothing to buy? They're shocked. They said, you know, we're big on industrial gases, we're big on white goods. I said, who makes it in the Philippines? I said, nobody. It's all imported. So, if we're going to have sustainable growth, or not sustainable, sustained, sorry, growth. Hopefully it's sustainable too. But sustained growth, you have to have industry and manufacturing. Now, we cannot catch up with where others are, but we can start. How do we start? You start with the building blocks, like steel, okay? Like storage, like logistics. Then you also throw in the industries where you potentially have an advantage. What are the industries where you have advantage? Where it already is. For example, mining. I mean, you already have the copper and nickel. Now, number 2 would be basically agriculture, where you bring up the value chain. It also leads to less wastage and more value added, and tourism and renewable energy and infrastructure. But you start with those, you start to build quality jobs that are needed. Like, give credit to Indonesia's previous president. About 7 years ago, he said, no more raw exports of nickel. Because he was number one, Indonesia's number one, was able to do it. That last year, if I remember right, because I don't have the figure, I think the exports were about 6 billion of nickel concentrate. Last year, because he forced all the processing to be done in Indonesia, exports were 70 billion in 6 years. Because there's one thing to export a raw product and export a finished product. So he captured 1,000% return in 6 years that would have gone to other countries. What do we have here? We had one smelter, copper smelter, that we argued about for 30 years, finally built it overpriced, privatized it to Glencore underpriced, and it's now Glencore's most profitable smelter. And it cannot even handle all the production, reduced as it is in the Philippines. So there are opportunities that are not now, because normally to have a successful manufacturing economy, it's not like, oh, Toyota's good, let's bring Toyota. No, you have a whole supply chain and logistics chains. Because, I mean, Ben would be a better expert than me. What percent of a Toyota car is made by Toyota? See, so 20%. 80% are suppliers who are specialized. They make this, they make that. So if you don't have that supply chain, what are you going to do? Import as well? So that's why I'm saying start with the places where part of the input is already here. Mining, food products, things like that. Now, so with that, let me go to my last point, which is, because 20 minutes, which is needed to have sustained growth. Frankly, the people. Our education sucks. We're dealing with issues that were settled 50 years ago in other countries. And I'm not talking about divorce, because that was settled 500 years ago in other countries, okay? Basically, you don't want to get divorced, don't. But why do you have to impose it on people who don't agree with you? Now, but let's not digress to that. Okay, what, hopefully with the new education secretary, will have an emphasis on education. What are we talking about? ROTC. Other countries have already settled it. You either have real military training like Korea and Singapore, or it's optional so that the people who opt for it will have real military training, not marching around in the sun with wooden rifles. That's not military training. That's wasting time. Then bilingual education. My God, that was settled 50 years ago when colonies ended. Comprehension matters more than language facility. We don't want to have a nation of mamsers. Okay? It's people who can comprehend, code, everything. You know, like people say, oh, speaking English is important. Well, not if you're dumb. Okay? And I'll tell you bluntly, I was recently in Vietnam. I had to go to this second-tier city, and the host said, would you like to have a massage? Of course, yes. Of course, the staff couldn't speak English. So what did they do? Google Translate. Please turn around. Okay, turned around. The world has gone beyond that. All right? But I had when I was still at Evercore, I had 3 clients because of Trump. From 2016 to 2018, they were planning not to shut down their production in China, but to second source it. So one was even owned by a Filipino Chinese, okay, who had moved to the US. So one was a pharmaceutical manufacturing company. They made like insulin injections, water pick, things like that. Another one was a SaaS, internet service company, and the other one was a software development company. All 3 were planning to second source in the Philippines. One was even scouting locations already in Mactan. All 3 went to Vietnam. Even the one owned by a Filipino. And I said, why? He said, more than costs, more than infrastructure, graduates of second-tier Vietnamese universities score higher than LaSalle, Ateneo, and UP. The data encoders and the engineers. And the people in Manila, they insist on being in Ortigas, Makati, or BGC. They are happy to be in second-tier cities because the internet and everything is worthwhile, the infrastructure is better, and they get the same salary as they would in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, and it goes further. So, let us please address this. The one thing I'll say very good about this government, they're aware of the issues. Trust me, that's not something I would give the last 2 governments the benefit of the doubt on. They actually are aware. They've also at least some of them have also graduated from the Washington Consensus, where they think the free market will do everything, not realizing things like the electric cars and batteries for cars in China was willed. It didn't just happen because of the invisible hand of Adam Smith. It was willed. You think Toyota, Honda, Nissan all happened because of open markets? No. MITI in the 1950s said, this is a priority. The 1,000% increase in value in the nickel industry in Indonesia didn't happen because of open markets. Widodo said, we are going to do this. So let me close with 2 quotes. When they were asking him why they're trying to put a man on the moon, John F. Kennedy said, we do this not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Most important things are hard. Most important things take time. Industrial policy is hard. Industrial policy takes time. Industrial policy is often mistaken and has to be changed. but that's why when you get it right, it's effective. However, what do the Washington Consensus people think? I think their slogan should be what I saw on the internet. We do this not because it was easy, but because we thought it was easy. In other words, it's the opposite of Nike. Just don't do it. Because it's hard, but it's necessary. So on that happy note, thank you very much for inviting me, and I wait later for our host to invite me to the fireside chat.
Thank you, Stephen, for the blunt assessments and the practical recommendations. But for now, we shall have our next speaker. So our next speaker is concurrently the Vice Chairman of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. He is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Bankers Association of the Philippines, as well as Chairman of its Open Market Committee. He is the first Filipino CEO in 31 years of Citi Philippines, responsible for all of its businesses and operations in the country, and authorized to engage in business dealings with counterparts in Asia-Pacific countries. Ladies and gents, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Paul Favila. Paul, you have the floor. Like Stephen, you have about 20 minutes.
When I found out I was going to speak after Stephen, I actually was a bit worried. It's going to be very tough to say anything after Mr. CuUnjieng, but I will try my best. To the Manila Times team, headed by Chairman Ang, to my fellow speakers, Senior Assistant Governor Lou Sicat, Stephen CuUnjieng, and everyone here in today's forum. Thank you very much to the Manila Times for inviting me to share my insights related to the forum's theme, Inspiring Optimism, Stimulating Growth. Now, let me start off by saying that I am in no way at all disagreeing with what Stephen just shared earlier. I've spent much of my career at Citi trying to sell this country, so I know how difficult it was, and I think it was is the important word to underscore, because there has been much progress since, and so this is the view from today. The beauty about the truth is that it can be seen in different directions, and therefore various perspectives are always welcome. The Philippines in recent times has received a fair amount of attention, being one of the fastest growing economies in the Asia-Pacific region, and has been presenting itself as a destination for foreign investment. As a matter of fact, the Philippines is positioned to be one of the fastest growing economies globally. Depending on who you're speaking with, it could be the second fastest growing economy, it could be the third, it could be the fourth. But one thing is consistent, it is at the top in terms of growth potential for this year alone. In many respects, Asia continues to be the growth engine of the world, which speaks volumes of the opportunities in this part of the world where we fortunately find ourselves in. With the worst of COVID-19 well behind us, the country's GDP expanded by 5.7% in the first quarter of this year. Citi's house view is that the country's growth rate will settle at 5.9% for 2024 and 6% for 2025, with nominal GDP hitting $500 billion US. With that, businesses are seen to ride the strong macroeconomic fundamentals of the country, with approximately 20% of businesses having expansion plans identified in 2024 alone. This is despite the interest rate environment. Business loans extended by the financial sector proved to be quite resilient, growing at a decent pace year on year. Our own clients continue to be very optimistic in their views of the country. Private equity has been active over the last number of years, driving M&A activity. Local clients have been pursuing big opportunities in infrastructure and energy in particular. And the growth of the digital economy has put significant focus on the Philippines as a growth engine for e-commerce and logistics companies. Of course, OFW remittances will continue to be a key contributor to the country's GDP. One of the lesser known facts, and the data as provided by Nomad, which is the think tank for migration and development issues, has shown that the Philippines has consistently been the fourth largest recipient of remittance flows globally, fourth after India, Mexico, and China. Interestingly enough, I stumbled upon this study as I was trying to figure out what the Philippines was really big in. And in as much as we pretty much know that we supply labor to the whole world, it's actually this kind of data that sorts of puts things into perspective. The steady growth of these flows clearly feed into the consumption-driven economy of this country, and thus it cannot be ignored. Another fact that I wish to highlight that is often underappreciated is that the Philippines is one of roughly 15 countries all around the world that has a population of more than 100 million. Now, I know that Stephen mentioned that he is not a believer in that. I look at it from a different perspective, because that only means that the Philippines has the potential of being a very huge market. If only 15 countries in the world actually have a population of more than 100 million. It's also one of the youngest, well-educated, and I know that might be contentious, highly skilled, naturally bilingual workforces with admirable work ethic. In fact, Citi has been a witness to this high-quality workforce.